All right, so welcome to the show today. Today we have Matthias Aebi on the show, who is the founder and CEO of Dizmo. So, Matthias, thank you so much for being on the show, for being here with me today. Let's dive right into your story. So, who is Matthias, and what's the story that got you where we are today?
Hi, Daniel. Thank you very much for having me on the show. Well, maybe I should start very early, which is when our family doctor called me Electric Matthias. The reason for that was because my father is and used to be what you today would call a maker. So he was making things out of electronics parts, and he does things that we actually do today with a lot of effort again, like if the bell rings, the phonograph, which it was at the time, went off, would be silent, so you would hear the bell and then it would continue to play, which is one of the important stories in smart home these days. And this is about 40, 50 years ago. So anyhow, this got me interested in technology, let's say, from really my childhood. And the second trigger, which I will really remember well, was the landing on the moon, which after that I got books about it, and there were these images of large holes filled with cubes, which were computers at these days. I mean, this was what you today take with you in the pocket. So, it really fascinated me. I can't really say why. It was just kind of like these artificial brains, kind of what they can do. I was always interested in science fiction. And so that kind of like really started in fourth, fifth grade. At that time, Swiss TV would show what they call Teleclub, which is online education, well, TV education actually at the time. And they would have a huge, large mainframe in the studio. And me as a fifth grader asked my parents whether I could participate. And they really agreed to buy these books. I tried to follow what these guys said. You could even send stuff and they would type it and send the output, the printed output back to you. I mean, this is incredible these days, of course. Still, this is how you got educated about computers in the 1960s. I didn't really understand anything, to be honest. But it was quite interesting. It was cool. And of course, that was at the time when geeks and nerds and all that stuff didn't really exist, even in the States. I mean, this was just about to develop, basically. So what I want to say with that is I really started with computers and technology very, very early. It always interested me. It was kind of the center of my interest, I can really say. And so this continued through gymnasium and later at the university. The funny thing is that when I wanted to start studying, it turned out that neither the ETH, the Technical University of Switzerland, nor the University of Zurich would have a curriculum for computer science. It just didn't exist. I mean, think of this. So that was in the 80s. And so because the ETH told me that they don't know when it would start, I decided to go to the university, which in fact was a mixture of economics and computer science. So there was no chance to have computer science alone. And I really hated, all the accounting stuff and all these financial things. Of course, I had to take a few of them. Looking back at that, being an entrepreneur today or becoming one over the years, of course, this wasn't the worst thing I could do. So today I can talk to a marketing person, understand what they're talking about. I can read a balance sheet, etc. So kind of like, after all, it's like probably many lives. It's a chain of events, of accidents, of chances, whatever. But at the core, it was always technology, and in particular, it was always computers. So sometimes I call myself a real digital native because I started that long before anyone who is today called a digital native started with it. So, well, long story short, already when I studied, I always had I was part of companies. I became shareholder with 24 so of one of those companies for which I worked, and this kind of continued basically then through the rest of my life. I never kind of thought of myself of being an entrepreneur or something like that. I always felt as a nerd, and actually, to be honest, I still do. So I'm interested in technology, but not technology per se, but always the application of technology. I think this is this is what is key. I mean, yeah, technology by itself can be fun, interesting, cool, whatever. But in the end, if you really want to kind of like have an influence in people's life and the world, do something that makes sense, then of course it's absolutely key that you understand what you're doing and why you're doing it and where this can lead and how it can enhance everyday life, for example. So through the next 20 years or so, I founded one of the first internet service providers in Switzerland, which of course went well into that. And based on that, on the success of selling that, we founded a company called Future Lab in 2000, which I led for about 13 years. And somehow, I was always interested in smart home, as I mentioned really in the beginning, with this bell ringing and the phonograph going off. So this was something that went along with my interest in computer. And so we got one of the jobs at Future Lab in around 2005 or so to write the gateway for one of the coolest smart home technologies, which is around now, Digitalstrom. And with that, I got to work together with Ludger Hovestadt, who is a ETH professor, very, very cool, smart guy, very visionary. And together, kind of like, we developed the concept of how this gateway should work. Actually, we did the technology, he did the vision, let's say. I learned a lot and got a lot of new angles on how to look at the smart home at that time. And after we had finished this project, we kind of thought within Future Lab, what should we do in order to kind of like keep growing with the technology? Because we had made sure that it was open source for several reasons. And so there was no revenue that could come out of that work. So we kind of thought about it and decided that we would do in 2009 the best smart home user interface that would exist at that time. So we looked at what everyone else did, analyzed it, and then came down with a list of things that it should do better, or in a different way or in a better way. So it would be more helpful, more easy to learn, more flexible, etc. And we did that for about 4 years within Future Lab, and then I realized that this is something that really has a much larger potential, actually. So it will not be limited, if you do that right, to smart home alone, but it can be a key technology which allows you to interact with your digital world, which is in everyone's mouths these days, of course, in a much more easy and more straightforward way. And if people ask me what it is, I usually ask back whether they remember any of those science fiction movies where a Minority Report, where Tom Cruise would do this movement. And so when they remember that, I say, this is what we do. This is kind of like, we make things accessible in the true sense of the word, if you like. And there is one important or interesting thing about that, because if I mention that movie and I ask people, what do you remember out of that Spielberg thriller, which is really a really great movie, what do you remember? They usually say that this is where Tom Cruise does this thing. So why do they remember those 20 seconds out of 90 minutes cool movie? And we believe that this is how we would like our digital world to be. We don't want to have abstractions like folders or icons or apps or whatever kinds of things, but instead we would like to have things. I mean, this is what Tom Cruise, give me this, compare it to that, combine it with that, and throw it away and get another one. This is what our brains deep down, of course, are used to do. So that was a long narrative, but basically gave you the flow from my very early beginnings to where I am today. Of course, with many stations or places that I didn't mention.
No, I love that. Thank you for evaluating that, because I think, I love starting early on, because it usually expresses better why people do what they do today, because it makes sense. You started very early on, when basically nobody knew what the hell, tech really is.
Actually, quite negative. There were some people who would say, what, computers? You're really working with computers? You're a strange guy.
So funny, like, 20, 30 years from today, we're going to look back we're going to listen to that conversation and go like, oh my God, remember the time when people said, I mean, artificial intelligence, is that really a good idea to develop that? Like this debate, and we will look back and go like, wow, remember those kinds of conversations? They were so silly. But that's a whole other topic.
Right.
The way, what you've built as well, you didn't just jump from one thing to another, but also you started, obviously like every entrepreneur, you started lots of different things. Some of them became successful, and then you stuck with it for a number of years and really focused on the growth, focused on the technology and things like that. And then you moved on because you saw a bigger application, a bigger impact with doing it another way, adding something to it. So you started a new company. So this is great. Now I want to dive into the present a little bit more. So right now, what's most exciting right now?
Yeah, right. dizmo is now in its 4th year, and we've kind of like developed the technology. And today we're at a very interesting point in the life of it. It's a startup, obviously, which is being financed by a lot of great people. And we're today at the point at the kind of like the switching point in time, because we're still pre-revenue, kind of. Well, we do have our first revenue, but we're kind of like entering the market now. And this has taken quite a while, actually, because what we do is nothing that except with that image that I tried to draw before, can easily explain to people. Nevertheless, once they've understood what it is and what it means and what they can do with it, they start to understand how important it is for them to kind of like figure out how to implement things that they are having troubles with for many years, like a company who has these meetings of the executive board where they meet every week. They have a 10-meter long whiteboard, and they bring paper to that and then kind of put it on the wall and start to discuss about it. But I mean, well, that's one thing, having that data on that board. But then the second thing is kind of how do you figure out what the correlation is between if I do something in marketing, how will that impact your market, and can the factory produce that? Bring all that data together, and you can hardly do that in paper. So if you can do that kind of on a wall like the one behind me, where just drag in things and bring them in relation to each other and do analytics on the fly, basically discuss that, this is a completely different way of having these kinds of discussions, of bringing ideas to the table, having brainstormings, etc., etc. So it's neither presentation nor really kind of brainstorming only. It's the combination of both, plus a lot of other things like data analytics. So what we really do is integrate those things into one digital surface. And when I'm talking about this example, this is one of the customers we're currently talking to, and they're of course obviously interested in improving that situation, which is based on, well, non-digital technology, let's say, and bring that to the next level in order to be more efficient. And there are quite a few of those companies out there to which we're currently talking. Plus, we have decided to go for a B2B2B or B2B2C track, in fact, meaning we go through partners like IBM, TIBCO, Everest, and other ones with whom we've been talking for more than a year now. Actually, it's closer to 18 months that we are kind of like trying to explain to those giants what the technology means, why they can use it to create better products, better solutions for their clients. And although it takes more money and patience to do that, we do believe that, well, being a startup of maybe 20 people, well, it's hard to scale that across the globe and to reach a company like Walmart or something like that. This is really far away for a structure we are today. So we decided to team up with those huge partners, which at the same time, of course, obviously are also potential buyers of the technology in the future, or the company, in fact,
Yeah.
or the intellectual property, if you like. So this is the path of a typical startup, quite obviously, and it's clear. And Welesow in the past once said, the function of a startup is really to be innovative, to create new things, and to kind of like show that they work and find the right applications. And then it's really the function of large companies to multiply that at a large scale, at the best price, at the best quality, and really make sure that this is kind of like stable and works for those customers. And this is kind of a bit also like I tend to think and work. I'm blessed with having ideas. Let's put it this way, which means there is always a new idea every morning. I need to put them down at the moment because there is this one idea that I'm working on together with the team. But I as you said, I try to kind of like take one of those ideas, think about it, analyze it, figure out whether it's worthwhile to kind of really do that, and then do that for a few years. And then, of course, as I kind of just indicated, put it into the hands of someone who can multiply. We did that with the internet supplier as well, where we kind of sold it to a telecom company, which, of course, had hundreds of thousands, millions of households being their customers, so we could only hardly have gotten there where they were already. On the other hand, they needed the technology, they needed innovation, so they kind of bought it, which is
absolutely
great for business.
Makes a lot of sense. So there's a keyword that you mentioned before, and I want to dive a little bit into that because we had a great conversation last time about a little bit about the future. So I want to sort of talk about this idea of the interaction with digital, because that's sort of like the core of it, right? How do we humans interact with this digital world in a more natural way? That's sort of like, so maybe, I mean, right now, the state of the art is basically, we have devices and everything that enables us to do it. But very often, I think most people feel the same way. We don't really feel it's the most natural way for us to interact with all these things, right? Just because I have a Google Docs app on my iPhone doesn't mean it's the most natural way for me to interact with Google Docs, right? So where do you see where we're heading in the next 5 or 10 years when it comes to interaction with digital? Do you think it's going to be just like people dreamed about in science fiction 10 or 20 years ago, where there's no more newspapers, but there's just flat, bendable things where all the stuff is on? Or what's your vision?
Well, what we believe, actually what we see already, is screens are everywhere, right? I mean, they have all kinds of dimensions, forms, technologies behind them. Some of them are projections, some of them are real screens. You might even wear glasses, I mean, like HoloLens, stuff like that, which kind of creates a virtual screen or a virtual digital surface, as we tend to call it. Because, for example, our table at which I'm sitting here is 3 by 4 meters. We can turn that into a digital surface. It's by no means a screen, obviously, because it's a projection and a device picking up my movements. So what I'm trying to say is that the hardware is basically there. We see that, and it develops fast. Whether this is foils that we're going to see, whether these screens become larger or smaller, that's sometimes even a question of fashion. I mean, like Apple had the small ones, then they had to bring bigger ones. So this will change all the time. It's a question of practicability. So like your bathroom mirror could easily be a screen or a digital surface. Actually, even an interactive one. There are all these smart home videos which show you this kind of stuff. The only sad thing about this it is that the software that is being shown in these movies is FX, so of course it doesn't exist. So what I'm trying to say is we will see a proliferation of digital surfaces everywhere. So even a restaurant table could turn into a digital surface easily. I mean, today you can do that. It's not even a big deal. It's also not something that is expensive, in fact. So now the question is, if you have all these screens and you have your digital stuff, let's say, which is a bit like the stuff on your desk, but of course it's digital because, and this is often mixed up, things have turned digital. There is no question about that. things are now captured in our smartphones, more or less. This is the end of digitalization in the sense of where we have these things and where we access them. So where this is really the last thing you would like to do, or the last thing you would like to have, if you could have any surface being digital, so the door behind you could become a digital surface and could show you a few things. You could put it away, just really like Tom Cruise does that on that transparent screen. So it's not about hardware. In fact, it's more about, well, even not even the software. It's about the concept. So how do we structure things so that we can work with them, that we recognize them, that we can exchange them easily, that we can push them from here to there. I don't want to know that the manufacturer of my smartphone is whoever, Samsung or Apple, and because I bought the Windows computer from Microsoft, well, it's really hard to get this piece of information, which can be a document or a weather report or whatever I'm looking at, the map. It might be really hard to bring that just with the move of your hand over to that other device. This is what we dream of, right? Like, we don't care what hardware we use. We don't really care about the operating system. Why would we? All we care about is kind of like our stuff. That's ours. This is important. My photos, my music, my setup about convincing someone, informing someone about something I thought of, etc., etc., etc. And we would like to share, to kind of like collaborate on these things, even across distance. So if I have if you have a digital surface at your place, and I have a replica of that digital surface here, I can drag in a few things I prepared here, and it will appear on your surface at the same moment. So for the two of us, it's really like having a common desk, which of course in the physical world isn't possible. And if you're in your room have 3 or 4 digital surfaces, like push something over there. This is what we see. There is one demonstration you see quite regularly. This is a guy with a smartphone, a movie running on it, standing in front of a screen, and then kind of like, well, I should show it here, doing this movement, right? And the movie will continue to play on the TV set. So if you would like to play hard in him, say, I've got another screen from your company in the kitchen. How do I bring the movie over to the kitchen? And of course, there it ends. So we had to come up with concepts that allow you to do that in the most natural way, actually with the flick, more or less. Although that doesn't work if I need to flick in the direction of New York, because I don't really know where New York is from where I'm sitting right now. So yeah, you need to have a few more good ideas on how to make these things play well. But in the end, what you get is really kind of an environment, let's say, digital surfaces, which really just play together and interact. There is no real abstraction anymore, in the sense of, well, yes, you can organize things, but you don't need to understand what a program versus a document is, for example, because it's just kind of like the thing, the document itself, or the weather display, or the map. It's neither a website nor a cloud nor anything else. It's a map. For me, it's a map. I'm not interested what is behind it. In fact, if I want to use it today, I have no way around kind of like getting subscriptions here and there. Well, you might still need subscriptions because people want to be paid for what they offer you. But still, I would like to move these things across my devices without caring about what kind of device it is, even also not caring about whether it's a touch screen. I mean, all the things I showed with my fingers, but it could be as well a laptop with a mouse, which still is a very helpful and powerful device for certain things. So I don't even care whether it's touch or mouse or single click or voice, actually, which is another way of kind of like interacting with these devices. So what we're really trying to do, and where we see things going, is just what you quite often see in those science fiction movies, like it's here and there, and I put it over there, and I push it over to you, and then kind of like get it back, and which is, of course, I mentioned it before, deeply rooted in our brains. I mean, we know how to push a piece of paper across the table, most of us at least, and how to rotate it so that the other person can read it and take it back. And even that is being reflected in quite a lot of science fiction movies. Yeah, because it's natural. This is how we think, how our brains work, how we understand the world. we might develop, but we certainly develop slower than technology.
No, but but I totally love that. I mean, kind of like what I get about it, what I get out of it is there's in terms of the purpose, it's really about the collaboration between different people, different groups, and as what we call collaboration today is massively expanding as well. There's so many different ways around the world with crowdsourcing and all these things coming up right now are being established. We also need different ways of collaborating that are more flexible, that are actually more natural, because you may collaborate with somebody who has zero tech sense, and you want to make sure that it's just simply natural for us because we're human. And I love that there. And also what I'm sensing is sort of like this this idea, okay, it's got to be this technology or this technology or this, to kind of like
disappear.
Yeah, get rid of that discussion basically and focus on the actual user and focus on the actual user experience and say, okay, the end goal is to have an experience with digital that you have with paper. And we tried to get there with the iPad and writing on but it's still like, if I write on the iPad, I don't feel like I'm writing on a piece of paper. It's still not the same. It's still not as natural because I still feel it's an iPad underneath my hand. So if we can get to a place.
Right. It's framed. I mean, framed in the sense of, it needs to be an iPad. You can't easily move that drawing that you did from there, as I said, to a Windows machine or put it on the beamer in the front of your office, unless you've taken a lot of action up front, but not just kind of like, let's move it there. Again, as you've seen that many times in Smart Home of the Future videos and similar things. And by the way, it's not just about collaboration only. It could also be you yourself organizing your stuff, kind of like, we all have a lot of things that we take care of, that we're interested in, that would like to kind of organize, arrange a bit, and kind of then partially share that with that person, and on the other hand, discuss with someone else and kind of try to convey an idea that we've developed, etc., etc. So there is a fluid between presentation and collaboration, which still today, if you think about it, presentation is completely digitized. We show slides, although that's not really the last word in presentation, but still, this is what we have today. We do have a bit more. But then there is a huge gap. Sometimes you even turn on the light, you turn off the beamer, and you go over to that flip chart or the whiteboard, and then you start to scribble there, and you redraw the last slide in the worst case, right? Start to talk about it, and redraw it the second time because the scribbling ended up in nowhere, etc., etc., etc. Instead of just having a continuum where you present something, you nudge it to the side a bit, and then you start to take notes, and you do drawings, and you do the drawings across the last slide that you actually showed, and you can have more than one foil you put over that, so different people can show different ideas. So, and then you move it back, and you bring in another presentation with 4 or 5 slides. This person talks about it. You start to kind of create new ideas based on this input, etc. So it's the way we think and the way we work and we would like to work is much, much more fluid and agile than what our tools allow us to do these days. We're always kind of banging our heads against technological borders, which is what I tried to describe with framing that stuff on an iPad. It needs to be an iPad. It has to be that physical iPad in the worst case, even unless you go through the cloud. So you're always kind of locked into something. And quite obviously, many of these manufacturers do that on purpose, of course, because then you need to have a Mac, because otherwise with Windows, it won't work, or it won't work that well. I mean, from their perspective, that all makes sense. From a user's perspective, it makes sense to have no borders, basically, and not care about technology.
Yeah. I love that. I'm very, very excited about this this future, which is not that far ahead, like we used to think. It's already there in a sense. I think it's more about making it accessible to the larger public now. And as with everything new, people need to get into it and start to use it and understand it and spread it and things like that. So I'm extremely excited about this future. So thank you so much for elaborating on that. I really appreciate it. So if people wanted to connect with you, learn more about dizmo and about the company, a bit more about you, what are the best ways to do that?
Right. Well, one of them obviously is dizmo.com on the web. There's a newsletter there. You could follow us at Dizmos. So there is an S at the end. The other one was always already picked up. And then, of course, you can write to me by writing an email to Matthias at dizmo.com.
Perfect. So we're going to link to the sources below the video so people can make sure they check out your work, check out what you're up to. Very, very exciting stuff. So thank you so much for being on the show, Matthias.
Thank you very much for having me.